On this episode of China Unscripted, U.S. companies are funding China's military, while China uses a mock U.S. aircraft carrier for target practice, and what Hong Kong sacrificed for the world. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
And today we are unpopular, so we have no guests. It's just us.
You know, I like doing these every once in a while. It keeps us on our toes.
Me too. I like when we play a board game, a fun board game every once in a while.
Why didn't we play a fun board game today?
I suggested Settlers of Catan repeatedly.
I thought that was for later, not on camera.
Yeah, that'll probably be good for our gaming channel, which will be fun.
But
Yeah.
we do have an interesting podcast today, even despite not having games, right?
Do we? That's a lot of assumptions to make at the very beginning.
No, I'm gonna say that with a period and not a question mark.
That's how you said it. There was no question about it.
Yeah, I don't ask questions. I only provide answers.
All right.
I am hereby the worst journalist on the planet.
No, it seems like you're equivalent to most journalists now.
So you're saying I'm big league?
Yep, that's what I'm saying. So anyways, I get in the studio today, and I'm greeted by Shelley, who is screaming and clawing at the walls because she has found a very interesting story. She hasn't told me or Matt much about it. It sounds horrific, but she's gonna.
I'm not sure. Screaming and clawing at the walls. What?
I'm speaking my truth.
Okay, fine.
With a period and not a question mark. There you go.
All right. So I had just opened this Wall Street Journal article called U.S. Companies Aid China's Bid for Chip Dominance Despite Security Concerns.
And we aren't talking about Doritos.
Nope, we are talking about semiconductor chips. So it says Silicon Valley venture capital firms and chip industry giants like Intel are ramping up deals in China's semiconductor industry, alarming U.S. officials. Now, why is this alarming U.S. officials, Chris?
You're throwing it on me?
Or Matt, you're the one who gives answers.
Why are we making sensitive technology in China? Period.
No.
Because I can't ask a question because it's not a question mark.
It's not that we are making sensitive technology in China. And it is that U.S. companies
They want a joint venture.
Or they're just giving them money. These venture capital firms, right? They're not doing joint
okay, you're right.
ventures.
It is venture capital.
They're giving money so that they can make a profit off of these Chinese semiconductor firms.
Yeah, and just so people know, like, semiconductors are really important for, like, all modern technology.
That's why we had a huge car shortage this last year, right?
Mhm.
Because there's a semiconductor chip shortage.
So essentially, the mainland China's semiconductor industry is like all industries tied to the state and tied to the military with civil military fusion.
Yes, this is the other problem, right?
Right. And so what this means is that American venture capitalists are funding technology that will in part be used for the Chinese military, which, as you know, if you've read any of China's military white papers, they consider themselves at war with the United States. So we're literally funding an army, although indirectly, that wants to be at war with us.
Someday this technology will be used to kill Americans.
And the thing is that China has the reason that there's so much investment going on in China's semiconductor industry is that they have a problem right now. They do not have the advanced technology. They do not have technology as advanced as the US or Taiwan. Taiwan has the biggest semiconductor chip maker in the world, TSMC. So that's actually been talked about as one of the reasons that the Chinese Communist Party may want to take Taiwan sooner.
Well, this is because China's whole technological program of advancement has been to steal intellectual property from other countries, other companies. And so that doesn't necessarily yield you the highest quality tech.
Or you may be just lagging because how quickly can you steal it?
Yeah.
There was a huge problem a few years ago with espionage, corporate espionage at TSMC. Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges with high technology like chip making is that you can steal the theory, but it's very hard to steal the practice of it because these machines are extremely sensitive. You know, depending on like the calibration of the machines and a bunch of other factors, like a semiconductor factory might make, say, 1,000 chips. And out of those 1,000, maybe only 500 of them are made well enough that they can be like that grade of chip they're aiming for. And so the other chips often become like sold as lower grade chips because they're just not perfect like that. And the level of perfection has to be so high. You know, a tenth of a millimeter is far too big of an error to make.
You know,
right?
maybe the reason they're so sensitive is because these semiconductors are being held to such unrealistic standards of perfection.
Yeah, I mean, it's because they're reading too many of these semiconductor magazines. But at any rate,
I feel like you were going for parents or something.
I was like semiconductor
And-
beauty magazines.
Yes, and then
Oh,
that's
You should have had
I
the beauty
understood.
magazine
I understood where Matt
argument
was
there.
coming from.
we're
Yeah.
also teaching you about joke craft on this show.
Or joke attempts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, but my point is like, fortunately, it's not like you can just steal the plans for what a chip design is and then reverse engineer it.
Immediately do it.
Right, because like you need the manufacturing equipment, and there's many other things that I don't know the details of, right? But it's like it's certain technologies are like for example, I learned in college physics class how to make a nuclear weapon, but you can
FBI, please do not shut us down.
But like it's easy to understand the theory of how you take a critical mass of U-235 and split it and releases energy and calculate that, right? But the actual technology into the machinery is extremely difficult, and to get the refined uranium is extremely difficult, right? Like you need centrifuges, and it's just complicated.
As Iran is finding out.
Right.
Yes.
And so like how many countries have nuclear weapons? Very few, like less than a dozen.
Even though the understanding of how to make them is
It's essentially
taught in high school classroom.
Well, college at least, but yes, right? So like, and I am at best an amateur at physics, and I understand how to do it. So there's no doubt that like any dictatorship or whatever could figure it out. But again, the amount of money, the amount of resources that goes into it, the extremely specialized knowledge of how to like just take it that last mile, it's extraordinarily difficult.
Well, this is why the Trump and Biden administration have put bans on U.S. companies investing in Chinese companies tied to the military.
Yeah, and they've also banned U.S. chip makers from selling certain types of chip technology to Chinese companies.
And yet,
Yeah, so, and what's interesting too is that the Chinese Communist Party is really pushing semiconductors right now, which is, I think, why these venture capital firms are seeing this as a opportunity,
we
right?
can make money.
Because in the latest 5-year plan that Xi Jinping brought out in 2020, he talked a lot about becoming self-sufficient in things like semiconductor chips because China is reliant on other countries right now. They do not have the technology. So once, for example, the U.S. banned sales to Huawei, Huawei's business took a huge nosedive because they did not have the technology they needed. They had to buy it from the U.S. And so Xi Jinping was like, we need to become self-sufficient. We need to invest in our semiconductor industries so we don't have this problem. While we are also making the rest of the world dependent on our economy and our products. This was in the 5-year plan. It's not a secret.
Yeah. And what better way for China to be self-sufficient than to do it using American venture capital money?
Yeah, I don't want to, just slander venture capital firms because it's not just venture capital. There are several venture capital firms, Lightspeed, Sequoia Capital, Matrix Partners, Redpoint Ventures, that have made at least 67 investments in Chinese chip sector companies since the start of 2020. According to the Wall Street Journal, there's not clear how much money went into these deals, but probably it was in the billions of dollars.
So at the start of 2020, like this is when the coronavirus is spreading around the world because the Chinese Communist Party covered it up. I wonder if the people behind these deals like ever had a moment of self-reflection where they're like, I wonder, is this a good idea?
Intel, the U.S. chip-making firm, is also backing a Chinese company that is, trying to create these chip design tools, what you're talking about, essentially, the machinery, right?
Right.
So yeah, this is concerning. And the US government is also extremely alarmed, and the Biden administration and US lawmakers are apparently talking about trying to pass laws and regulations that will close some of the gaps that allow these companies to do this kind of stuff right now.
I mean, I don't really understand how do our laws define what Chinese companies are tied to the military? Because if you can't invest in a company that's tied to the military, but all Chinese companies are at least indirectly tied to the military, and that the military, by Chinese law, can co-opt any or all of that technology or any or all of those products, then like, how is that not tied? I don't understand. Are we stupid?
Yeah, well, I mean, where you're stupid rich.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing.
That's not true. We are smart poor.
Okay, yeah, but I mean,
Well,
these venture capital firms,
yeah.
right? Or Intel.
Oh man, being stupid sounds amazing.
When the Wall Street Journal tried to ask Intel about this, they defended themselves by saying, "Well, that's a very, small portion of our investment. Our China investments are only 10% of our global investments. Like we don't invest that much in China."
Why don't you talk about the billions of dollars we put into the volcano that we throw children into? Come on.
But
keeping it burning all the time, it takes a lot of pandas to burn up. I don't know how volcanoes work.
I felt like you were going somewhere with that, and then the pandas came in.
Yeah, it was probably not the best choice.
Stupid pandas.
It should have been like, rainforest. Like we have to use so much rainforest timber to keep the volcano hot enough to burn the children. This is Intel's business. Does that count as libel or slander?
Remember last week when our podcast went off the rails at the end?
Yeah. Well, this is the nice thing when it's just us. It's there are no rails.
It's just careening around.
Well,
out of control.
I feel like we're playing bumper cars in like a giant ring that's just the three of us like driving around fast and crashing into each other.
It's a lot of fun. But the point you're making about like the laws, like the main thing is like, it doesn't matter how many laws you make if the people behind these mega corporations are always trying to find some loophole to do these investments that like with no knowledge of or awareness of the fact that they are helping an authoritarian regime that is building up its military with the purpose of overthrowing the United States.
But Chris, it doesn't matter because it's not that much of Intel's investment that's going to China.
That's right. They're only going to be a little bit behind the weapons that the PLA uses to kill Taiwanese soldiers and the U.S. soldiers that try to defend them.
Yeah, well, a lot of people who are doing these investments may not worry too much about that because, maybe they feel that they're citizens of the world.
Some of these investment firms have said that, these decisions were made by our China affiliates. Like they have different venture capital. Like Sequoia was saying, we have a bunch of different independent firms that all operate under Sequoia Capital. So this decision was made by the China-based one.
So it's part of their company or not part of their company?
I think it's technically Sequoia Capital China.
So it's still their company. So either Sequoia is in charge of it and they're responsible for some division being allowed to make these choices, or Sequoia Capital is not behind it and should therefore completely divest from it.
Yeah, and I wonder who is in Sequoia Capital China. Like, who are those people? Are they people with links to the Communist Party?
Well, you have to have people with links to the Communist Party to have a China-based,
So essentially, plants from the Communist Party are in these companies telling them to invest in the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, I don't know that they really have to tell them to. You're already in China. You came here to invest.
Yeah.
So that's not really...
But like specifically like, hey, semiconductors, who cares about... Like, so this week it came out that the Chinese military has created mock-ups of U.S. aircraft carriers that they're using for target practice. Like, is this not clear enough?
I mean, I think a lot of these venture capital firms really are more like, oh, well, our mission is to make money.
You know,
We have a fiduciary responsibility to increase the value for our shareholders.
Well, I mean, Chris, there was just, duct tape mock-ups of U.S. carriers.
I mean, it could
maybe
mean
they were
anything.
they were just, playing a giant game of paintball or something.
Right. It's like when they built that replica of the Taiwanese presidential palace near one of their military bases in China, and then did drills, taking over said mock-up of Taiwan presidential palace. But again, like that was just a game, so there's no relevance to anything, right?
Yeah, meanwhile, BlackRock telling us to triple our investments in China.
Or Goldman buying more Chinese real estate debt.
Even as the real estate market is imploding.
Well, the Chinese Communist Party is in the middle of bailing out the real estate market.
Yeah, but they have specifically said that, foreign companies are not a priority in that bailout.
No, I don't think Goldman needs to be bailed out right now. I think they're buying the debt because they think that the real estate industry in general will always get bailed out. Like this is
if you can buy it at 50 cents to the dollar, then now's a great time to invest in China while things are low.
They're also buying Chinese bonds, right?
It seemed from that Bloomberg article that they are buying Chinese government bonds that are yuan denominated. Yeah, so Chinese bonds in yuan.
Here's the thing about buying bonds, right? Like a government issues bonds when they need to raise money to pay for stuff that the government wants to do, right? Like government raises money largely in two ways, from taxes and from issuing debt like bonds. Yeah, there are other ways, tariffs and whatnot, but like those are the two main ways. So if you don't have enough tax money, you issue bonds, and these bonds fund whatever the Chinese government wants to do, which means that these US companies are taking their investors' money and directly giving it to the Chinese government to spend on whatever the Chinese government wants. That's crazy.
Oh my God, Matt.
That's crazy. I know it's loud, but I'm so upset by this. Why? Why, people? Why?
They have a fiduciary responsibility.
But yeah, this is the old saying that, the capitalist will. Well, who said this? Lenin?
Supposedly Lenin said this. I have not looked it up.
Capitalists will sell us the rope that we'll use to hang them.
Could have been Mark Twain.
Could have been Mark Twain. Who knows?
Or Abraham Lincoln.
Could have been Gandhi. Confucius.
Gandhi.
Was probably Confucius, right?
Yeah, but it is these people, like, they don't have any consequences for their actions. I mean, other people will have to pay the price. Any U.S. soldiers who get caught up in a conflict with China, they'll have to pay the price for their giving the Chinese Communist Party money to make semiconductors.
Even before it gets to the point of a kinetic war, right? We are already paying the price.
That's true.
Paying the price with COVID-19. We are paying the price with what is happening to the what's happened to U.S. manufacturing, what's happening to the U.S. economy right now. Like this is
supply chains.
Yeah, the supply chain whole just-in-time bringing things from Asia, that all happened because we decided to offshore to places like China.
And why do we do that? Because of a fiduciary responsibility.
They could make a lot more money and, something globalization.
Well, it results in lower prices for consumers in America. And that part is actually true. It's just that the part that you don't see is, like, the prices are lower, but Americans, especially the bottom 50% of Americans, are making substantially less money now because of the hollowing out of manufacturing, which has taken away jobs, which also those manufacturing jobs, disproportionately are held by lower income people with lower educations, typically more minorities, right? So that whole manufacturing transition has hurt the most vulnerable Americans. And like, if you used to work in the U.S. auto manufacturing industry, you would make in like 2021 dollars, you'd make the equivalent of like, $40 an hour, right? Sometimes $60. Like, you make a lot of money as a high school diploma auto worker. But now, wages have been driven down so much.
They're even saying that the new $15 minimum wage is now meaningless because of how much inflation has boosted prices.
I feel like, people have been pushing for $15 an hour for as long as I can remember. It's been at least a decade, the fight for 15 and different movements, right? So now, especially now, we've seen 6+% inflation this year, right? Like, it just doesn't mean that much anymore. But at any rate, whether or not you support a federally mandated minimum wage, I think everyone can agree that the better thing is for the market to drive wages higher than whatever that would be because of the natural market forces where companies are looking for workers and, workers have enough sort of different opportunities and negotiating power to be able to get decent livable wages. And that's not happening, and it's been getting worse since the late 90s.
Well, now it's maybe happening.
Yeah. Well, so actually that's interesting because 2021, we've seen like these worker shortages, right? I was talking to a landscaper a couple of weeks ago. He's like, I just can't hire enough people to do all the jobs that I want done. And this is, like a lot of this stuff is not high skill work, leaf blowing and whatnot. And like, that's how bad the shortage is. But while wages have gone up, wages have gone up 5.8% in the last year, but inflation is 6.2%. So like inflation is still worse. It's like there's still a 0.4 gap that wages have lagged inflation despite the worker shortage. And, at a very fundamental level, China has a big role to play in this, right? At a fundamental level, the gradual, look, it's not just China, right? That America has outsourced to. And I think it would be disingenuous to say, oh, well, China is the only one to blame. And, in the 80s, it was Japan making lower cost electronics and so on. And now it's more diverse than just China because you have Southeast Asia and whatnot. But China is still nonetheless a big and very significant part of that, and perhaps the main thrust of that as well. The drop in American wages has been highly correlated with having manufacturing done in China. And it's not just, low technology manufacturing, like putting together plushes or even manufacturing steel, but it's also now things like, college educated, PhD educated jobs like making semiconductors. And that's, another further hollowing out of the American workforce as American venture capital funds the kind of industries in China that, could otherwise be done in America by college educated people, advanced degree educated Americans. Like these jobs are just going to go away. And Xi Jinping's plan is to, become firstly self-sufficient in all these industries. And then on top of that, to start making the rest of the world depend on those products that they're making.
Well, it wasn't just those products, but the idea is that we've already kind of made the rest of the world dependent on Chinese products. We need to continue that even as we are self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things that you often hear the argument from people, this was one of the things about the tariffs that the Trump administration was trying to impose, right? That a lot of the, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in China, this kind of stuff, they were all like, well, the American people are going to have to pay the price with higher cost for goods.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what that's what the argument was. That's what the focus was on, that, oh, well, you're going to not be able to get stuff at the dollar store for so cheaply, or you're not going to be able to get stuff at Walmart or Target.
Or it would hurt American farmers. But that would be because China was attacking American farmers with their own tariffs, not so much of a natural market force thing.
But the idea that, it's good for us to have a low-cost manufacturing in China, and if you want to tariff those things, that's disadvantageous to Americans. And I think one of the things is that people in America, a lot of people we've talked to do not like having to buy a lot of things made in China that are
Yeah.
Especially, the kind of things that you get on Amazon Marketplace that, that are cheap and will break and
Of terrible quality. I've gotten things from Amazon that just smell toxic.
or you go on Amazon, you look for just something really like a pair of scissors or something, or
A tea kettle, something to boil water.
yeah, and then you see all these different companies that are making the same tea kettle that are obviously all Chinese companies, and you're not sure which one is actually the original company because they're all, it's probably one factory.
It's so difficult to find even an alternative. Even if you wanted to spend more for something made in the US or made anywhere besides China, just a lot of times you can't even find it.
Yeah, there's so much noise. It's difficult to figure out. And there's no law that says that companies have to disclose the product origin on the internet.
I bought a desk for our new studio setup, and you saw this as well, Shelley. So I was trying to get something from IKEA, and there were supply chain issues, and I wasn't able to order from them. I bought this one on Amazon. It didn't say it was from China, but I bought it and I got it. And then firstly, you could see on the physical product, it did say made in China, which really bothered me. And on top of that, if you actually looked at the instruction manual, it was a direct knockoff of IKEA. When I put it together, it was the same style with the pegs and the screws, everything. It was exactly the same. Even the first page of the instruction manual, you're like, oh my gosh, it is such a ripoff of IKEA.
It's the two IKEA guys,
yeah,
right?
I'll put it on screen here. And so, but I had no way of knowing where it was from. It's so hard.
Sometimes they'll say imported, but they don't have to say where it's imported from.
But this one didn't say that. But anyway, it's really frustrating because I've made such an effort to try to get stuff made at a minimum, not in China, but ideally made in America for all the new stuff I'm buying. And it's almost impossible. And especially if you're getting anything online, because there's just no way to know, because the companies are, I believe, intentionally not disclosing the origin of products because they don't have to, so they won't, because they know if they put a big made in China thing, people aren't going to buy it. It's like companies that have stuff made in the USA, they all say made in USA, right? Because they know that consumers want that. And if they're hiding where it's from, where do you think it's from?
In some cases, the companies themselves, I was buying a desk and I tried to call several different furniture companies to figure out where their products were made from. It just said imported. And I talked to customer service people. I chatted online with customer service people. Nobody had access to that information.
Ah.
That was the weirdest thing. They were like, oh yeah, we'll get back to you. And then they got back to me and they were like, we don't know. That's not in our database. We cannot tell you. I would have to go physically look at the desk or the box the desk came in, where it would have to have a country of origin stamp.
And if it's an online thing, you would literally have to somehow go to the warehouse and look at it, which you wouldn't have access to. I'm not going to just let you into their warehouse.
And it's not just tables and electronic appliances. The other day, I bought some spinach from my local supermarket, and I was eating. I was like, this tastes a little strange. It was like a bag of frozen spinach, and it tasted a little strange. And I looked at the bag, and it said imported from China.
Your frozen spinach?
My spinach was from China.
Was this in a Chinese store?
No.
Huh.
Just a normal supermarket.
Lot of U.S. garlic comes from China, which is also horrifying because
ginger too.
There was an investigation, I think, from Financial Times a few years ago that found that Chinese prisons, had been making their prisoners peel garlic for export. That's where you want your garlic from.
It's like the Xinjiang tomatoes, where they're having Uyghur slave labor, or I guess they call it something like
how dare you, Matt?
Involuntary work training programs.
No, it's a vocational education, and they're all there happily under the watchful eye of a Chinese policeman for their safety.
So if you buy maybe not Heinz ketchup in the U.S., but a lot of ketchups in Russia, Eastern Europe, and that sort of region of the world, a lot of
Not
those.
just Russia and Eastern Europe. CBC, the Canadian media, came out with this investigation that showed a lot of Canadian canned tomato products and sauces were coming from Xinjiang.
Yeah.
And they were being routed through companies in Italy, different places. But like the origin of the tomatoes was from Xinjiang.
Why can't we just grow food
The US,
in America?
The US a few years ago under the Trump administration did ban tomato products from Xinjiang.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the problem. It can be very hard for US customs to figure out where these products come from because, like I said, with the Canadian products, some of them were an Italian company, right?
Yeah,
And-
they know how to hide it.
This reminds me of the honey from Dubai,
Right.
a country or city-state that does not produce its own honey.
There was briefly I don't know if there still is this ban, but for a number of years there was a ban on Chinese honey because China was using a certain type of pesticide that could have been dangerous to bees or something like that because we were having the whole, bees dying off mysteriously all over the world thing. So the USDA had, the US Customs had banned imports of Chinese honey, but then what was happening were these Chinese honey producers were routing their honey through a third country, like Dubai.
Mm.
And then it's stamped, made in Dubai honey or coming from Dubai honey. And then that was to evade the customs.
But like with the spinach thing, I just think it's so crazy that we have a system where instead of like upstate New York, a farmer grows spinach and it gets to the local grocery store. This spinach was grown somewhere in China under who knows what conditions, frozen, put on a boat and shipped all the way to the other side of the world.
And that's cheaper. Well, fresh spinach is not expensive, but it's more expensive than frozen spinach.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy.
It's insane, the world we live in. And then also you got to think about like, besides all of the like terrible conditions in China and the hollowing out of, say, in this case, farming, like think about the environmental impact of having to ship food halfway around the world, whether it's on an airplane or a container ship, right? Like the amount of fuel that they use, the carbon footprint, like it's just such a stupid way to do it when you could just truck it in 50 miles from upstate New York. Like it's so dumb. It's so dumb. But because it's so ridiculously cheap in China and like all these other costs and all these other externalities, whether it's environmental or whatnot.
Well, economies of scale, Matt.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, also, they've built these supply chains over the last 20 to 30 years to operate like this, right? So now if you wanted to, like when we interviewed that guy from Prestige Ameritech, the mask maker who was talking about how you cannot even manufacture masks that easily in the US anymore because a lot of the equipment was sold off.
Yeah. It actually reminds, I've been rewatching 30 Rock recently, and there was like an episode where they start a factory to build sofas, but American engineers don't know how to build sofas anymore, and so the sofas just come out. Well, what ends up happening is they sell to the U.S. government to use as torture devices.
Okay.
Because they're that uncomfortable.
This is this is an interesting 30 Rock, episode.
Yeah.
That's more off the rails than this podcast.
Well, no, it makes sense because like when all of this manufacturing is shipped off to China, we lose the ability to make that. It's not like, and this is what the guy at Prestige Ameritech was saying, it's not like just you can be like, okay, let's start a factory.
Because who knows how to do this anymore?
Yeah,
right.
Where do you
gone.
get the equipment? We sold it 20 years ago to China.
Right. And there's a lot of knowledge that goes into manufacturing that can't be fully documented in like a training manual. So, over time you've had people like a lot of Americans and other Westerners go to China and teach local factory workers and managers how to make the stuff that used to be made in their country. Right. And that knowledge is then passed on. And then those Westerners retire or get out of the industry. And then that's it. That knowledge is now been like fully transferred to China and it dies off in that country, the original country. So just imagine all the things Yeah, whether it's masks you can't make anymore. We look at, 20 years from now, if this continues, or even 10 years from now, it may not even be possible to make semiconductors in the US if all of that knowledge just goes to China. We rely on only China, and then we stop having factories in the US. So just that knowledge is gone.
And especially if Taiwan, the place that's making the best semiconductors in the world right now, gets invaded by China because they have semiconductors that U.S. venture capitalists have helped fund.
Well, the good news is that China needs the technology from semiconductors to be able to successfully invade Taiwan, which they can't get until they successfully invade Taiwan.
Oh, just watch.
Yeah. Speaking of the mock-up of the U.S. aircraft carrier that they're using for target practice, they're preparing for that. It's a very real thing. Well, so yeah, just this week, a group of U.S. lawmakers traveled to Taiwan. This was, one of those things that wasn't really announced. Similar to something that happened back in June, I believe. And, while the U.S. lawmakers are taking a tour of Taiwan, the kind of diplomatic engagement that China hates, they start holding, what did they call it?
Joint War Preparedness Patrol.
That's it. Joint War Preparedness Patrol. That would be a good tongue twister before you're about to, go on stage or
go into battle.
I don't think you need tongue twisters before
I always
battle.
do voice warm-ups before I, get into a fight.
I guess that's what Xena did.
She's the warrior princess of my heart.
Oh, really? Okay. Explains
Awesome
a lot.
show. Awesome show. And in real life, I think Kevin Sorbo, who played Hercules, and Lucy Lawless, who played Xena, actually do hate each other, perhaps.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's real. That show probably was, 25 years ago now? 20?
Probably more than that.
Mid-90s?
Yeah. Oh, man, that was great.
Okay, back on the rails.
Yeah, U.S. support for Taiwan. I was the training drills. Simultaneously, they're using U.S. mock-ups of U.S. aircraft carriers as target practice. It's really heating up in Taiwan.
I am really glad to see that U.S. lawmakers did make a trip to Taiwan, though.
Yeah.
And they visited, among other places, TSMC.
The semiconductor.
Yes, and they also visited the Taiwan's Ministry of Defense, which is apparently the first time that that's ever happened.
Which made this story about the venture capitalists seems even crazier to me. Like when you have U.S. lawmakers traveling to Taiwan to visit their semiconductor makers, just like how clueless are these venture capitalists?
Well, TSMC is also investing in the U.S. They're opening, I think, a plant in Arizona, I believe. So there is continued cooperation between Taiwan and the U.S. on the semiconductor issue.
Yeah. So definitely, while we kind of started this podcast on like the everyone is stupid, we're going to destroy ourselves, there's actually a lot to be pretty positive about. The U.S. engagement with Taiwan is definitely ramping up. And part of that is like working with Taiwan to build semiconductors. So there is a positive current to a lot of this as well.
And working with Taiwan on defense, I think that's really important because the only way for there to not be a war over Taiwan or an invasion of Taiwan is for there to be sufficient deterrence.
Actually, one of the senators that went to Taiwan, John Cornyn, he is the co-sponsor of this new bill called the Taiwan Deterrence Act. That is basically, a lot of this is military funding stuff, but the idea is that the U.S. needs to help Taiwan with its defense more than it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, as this was happening, the Taiwanese Defense Ministry put out a report that said basically right now the PLA has the ability to blockade Taiwan. So they already have the ability to do this. It's not happening because of deterrence, basically. Because right now the Chinese Communist Party knows it can't handle dealing with the U.S., dealing with Japan, dealing with Australia and India.
And I think that's why what Blinken said this past week about the U.S. and allies being willing to take action is a good thing to say, even though it's not quite it's not exactly unambiguous as to what does action mean, right? But you would assume that it's more than just a stern warning.
Yeah, we do not appreciate China invading Taiwan.
Please don't. Yeah, no, we're taking stronger stands on that. And I think one thing that we could do is move, in some sort of seemingly unofficial capacity, start moving more U.S. troops to Taiwan to do things like training and set up equivalent of like military facilities. But obviously, with Taiwan, you call it something else, right? That's not as provocative as saying a military base in Taiwan. But like we got to have those things, and we got to have the, joint military drills with Taiwan that are as effective as the joint military drills that we have with the Quad and other countries. But we just call them something else.
The boba exchange.
What does boba stand for?
Oh, that's a California thing for the bubbles and bubble tea.
Yeah, I know, but you'd have to come up with some weird acronym because it's the military, right? Like
boba could be the acronym.
Yes, exactly. So there has to be an acronym. Okay, this
bombardment
is
already,
No, this is already bad.
No. Okay.
Bombs over Beijing action.
Ongoing buddy action.
There we go. That's not terrible. Shelley, good job.
It was going okay at first, and then I think I lost the
acronyms are hard.
Yeah.
But I believe that most of the U.S. government's bureaucracy is actually most of the time and money is spent on making acronyms.
You wouldn't necessarily be wrong about that.
Like, ask anyone who works in government. They're like, yeah, it's basically alphabet soup over here.
I like whenever, there's a new congressional act and they have to come up with some acronym for it, or a lot of the military drills have it's like the Eagle or something, and Eagle is something.
I like the way they used to name things was more after like people or names, right? Or like, I guess the example I'm thinking of is like the Miranda rights, which was named after a person, right? It's like, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say,
I don't.
That right, like that's not an acronym. That's from like the 60s, I think. But like, it was sort of the last 50 years or really 40 years that like everything has moved from names to acronyms.
Yeah, we could name something after what's his name? Dean Stockwell. I think he just recently passed on. The guy who played Al in Quantum Leap.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, he recently died.
I've never seen Quantum.
You've never seen Quantum Leap?
No. Wow, I did not expect such a strong reaction.
Oh my god.
He's just trying to get back home, Shelley.
No.
Or was he trying to put right what once went wrong?
Where was Quantum Leap? Was it like a network show?
I don't know.
Did I have to have cable to watch this?
I don't know. It's like an 80s show.
It was a good show, so probably you did have to have cable.
Yeah, fantastic. You'd probably really like it.
Yeah.
Should we start a channel where we watch Quantum Leap episodes?
That's probably
very
not
niche.
good.
It's a little obscure.
A little niche.
Yeah, great theme song.
Yeah.
Wait, will we get a copyright flag?
As long as you sing it really badly, I think we're fine.
Let's move it back to Taiwan, because that's where this whole thing is coming from, right? Like how do we use sufficient acronyms to work with Taiwan?
Sam leaps back in time into the body of Chiang Kai-shek and uses it to win the war against Mao.
I mean,
like before they even fled to Taiwan, you're talking about? Oh, okay.
To put right what once went wrong.
Well, I mean, you could also argue that he could go back and convince Chiang Kai-shek to establish separate diplomatic relations with the U.S. officially, so that as a condition of the U.S. recognizing the PRC diplomatically, which at the time seemed necessary to counter the Soviet Union, but the Communist Party would have to accept as a condition of that we would also recognize the Republic of China as its own independent country.
This sounds too complicated for TV.
Oh,
the
you're
most
right, for
boring episode of Quantum Leap ever.
It's all a bunch of
what
like,
if
diplomatic
we
meetings.
establish different diplomatic relations versus like
Unless you got like Daniel Day-Lewis to play.
Oh, to
I'm
play
just thinking.
Chiang Kai-shek.
Well, I was just thinking about Lincoln. I was thinking about Lincoln.
No.
and how the
I
whole
know you were
thing-
thinking about Lincoln, and he was
Yeah.
great. But
well, if it's a modern day Quantum Leap starring Daniel Day-Lewis as the Sam character, because there were episodes like that where he did leap back into.
He looks in the mirror and it's Chiang Kai-shek, but for the rest of the episode, it's just Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, exactly. Because that happened in
Yeah.
the show. He would leap in back as women, as different ethnicities. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and there's always the shot of him looking in the mirror.
It's like,
right?
whoa. One time he leapt into a paraplegic, I believe, like a guy who had no legs, but he still had legs, so he could like stand up, and that freaked out other people. Yeah, there was an episode.
Really? I don't remember that one.
Yeah, because I think like the solution to the problem for that episode involved him like standing up and punching a guy.
I mean, that really is the solution to all of our problems, as long as that guy is Mao.
That's right. Well, I mean, that's how all problems are solved on new Star Trek episodes. Burn. New Star Trek.
I'm just lost.
That was a good show too.
New Star Trek?
Lost.
Oh.
Yeah.
Also never watched Lost.
You've never watched.
I also haven't ever watched
You've
Lost.
never watched Lost. I feel like I've failed them.
Yeah.
Was this happening?
It was about a time traveling island. Come on.
I
Crazy.
remember Lost being really popular. I just hadn't watched it.
Yeah. At any rate, Taiwan.
You got to really commit to that, Matt.
I did have to commit.
Sam, I hope you leap back in time into Matt.
Wait, so what happens when he leaps back in time? Does it then change the time? Like, is this now a separate timeline?
It doesn't really go into that quite, but like basically he has to put right what once went wrong.
I think it just fixes it, Shelley. It just
It's
fixes
fixed.
history.
Yeah. There were some touching moments
Uh-huh.
in that show.
Okay, so it's not like that time travel show that NBC had a couple years ago where they kept branching off into different.
No, they don't go.
Mhm.
They keep it nice and simple.
Because they started messing with the timeline and then suddenly everything was different.
Well, as the show goes on, spoilers for Quantum Leap, everyone. As the show goes on, you get some sort of sense that perhaps there is some divine will behind everything the protagonist is doing. And then there's the implication that there might be some kind of demonic will behind a separate group of people leaping through time to put wrong what once went right.
Dun, dun, dun.
So it's like time traveling person of interest, but with God instead of AI.
There is an
Wow.
AI,
Okay.
Ziggy. After almost an hour of like very depressing talks about China, I like reminiscing about Quantum Leap.
Speaking of depressing, Hong Kong.
Well, this particular thing was actually not that depressing. Like we had an amazing time. How many years ago was it now?
7.
7 years ago when we were in Hong Kong for the Umbrella Revolution or the Umbrella Movement. I don't think that was ever settled what people prefer to call it. But-
Occupy Central.
that didn't work. That was the interesting about it. There was like sort of like the older organizers who were trying to create this Occupy movement.
Yeah, that was the original idea. They had already planned to do this. It was called Occupy Central with Love and Peace or something like that movement to, occupy the central business district.
because Occupy Wall Street had been such a rousing success.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, like, so what happened is that the Communist Party had basically promised Hong Kongers that by a certain year, and I think it was 2017, they were going to get the right to directly elect the
They
chief
kept
executive.
moving it back.
They moved it back, and then they basically canceled it. And then Hong Kongers protested, and then
Well, wasn't it that in 2014 they said, okay, we'll let you choose between the three candidates we select.
Right, that was it. That it was essentially going to be kind of like what they do with the People's Congresses, where they're like, you can pick, but we have picked the people who you're allowed to pick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, initially there was like this Occupy Central with peace and love idea. But then basically the young people of Hong Kong just kind of took it over, did their own thing, and it became something completely different.
Essentially, there were students, like high school and college age students, who started protesting in late September, and it got to the point where the police tear gassed people.
Which was unheard of in Hong Kong.
Right. And in 2014, it was unheard of in Hong Kong. So end of September, police tear gassed a group of protesters, many of whom were high school students. People were enraged and took to the streets, and estimates of like 80 to 100,000 people in Hong Kong taking to the streets, which is also fairly unprecedented. There had only been one major protest under CCP rule in 2003 that had about 500,000 people come out. So against Article 23. So that was the only previous big protest. So this was, 100,000 people came out on the streets enraged about the fact that the police had fired 87 tear gas grenades. And then, I know, like looking back at that, right? That's like how many they did in half an hour by the end of 2019. But that was the tipping point where after all those people came out on the street, people kind of stayed. And so the Occupy Central people essentially were like, all right, we're doing this now.
Yeah. And we were there. We actually spent a night in one of the tents.
It was very rainy that night.
Yeah. Sleeping in a tent in a wet tent in a suit was not fun.
Yeah, on concrete because we were on a freeway.
We truly suffered more than anyone else. Are we not heroes? Or are we dancers?
Please tell me that's a quote from something.
It's a song. Well, it's Are We Human or Are We Dancers?
Okay. Actually, I do remember very clearly getting the phone call from Alan, who was like, you guys should go to Hong Kong. And then being like, that's what?
Because this was about 2 years into the show. We had never really traveled anywhere.
And I hadn't been working on it for 2 years. I think I had only started helping you out in like 2013.
Yeah. And Matt had not really been involved by that point.
Right. That was the first time Matt was involved because you came as the field producer.
Yep.
And Alan, who suggested this trip, came as our camera guy. And I remember paying for my own ticket to Hong Kong. This was very bootstrap. We had no money.
Yeah.
We had 66,000 subscribers. This just seemed like a wild idea. But do you remember going to dim sum in Flushing with Alan and Matt? Yeah, and we kind of came up with
a training montage.
We came up with the idea to do it.
Uh-huh.
And then we were on a flight a week later, but in between, we filmed a training montage of you too that we could not do now because we used the Wang Fei Hong music.
Oh, and that'd probably be flagged.
That would totally be flagged now, but we used the Nan Dang Ziqiang music to have, you as if you were training for Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And then we filmed part of it on the plane to Hong Kong too. Remember this?
Yeah.
And then we had basically held it because we didn't want to tell anybody we were going, just in case for some reason.
Right,
yeah.
And then we published it when we landed. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing to, for the first time, really get out of the studio and, see really kind of like the front line of people fighting against the Chinese Communist Party.
And it was a very different experience than in 2019.
Yes.
Yeah. And
the whole love and peace thing, it was very much this it actually the energy reminded me of the earliest days of Occupy Wall Street.
I didn't see a single person with a crystal in Occupy Center.
There's a certain energy of this youthful, hopeful kind of, we're all in this together kind of feeling. And
I think that deteriorated much more quickly in Occupy Wall Street.
Yes, it did. It deteriorated very quickly in Occupy Wall Street. But I remember the feeling. It's kind of hard to describe. It also in a weird way reminds me of, I was just finished reading George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, and when he first went to fight, all of the soldiers had this spirit of
this is his memoir, Fighting in the Spanish
Civil War. So this was early 1937. like just this kind of spirit of camaraderie and like we're all, in this together. Like a lot of like foreign volunteers came to fight in this war, to fight against fascism. And it even reminds me of, the stories I've heard about the early days of the Tiananmen Square protests, which lasted for, over a month before the crackdown happened.
I mean, it was almost 2 months.
Yeah. And so like there's just this energy, this vitality, this love, this camaraderie, and this spirit of like we can do this, standing up to this authoritarian, this fascism, this like, evil bully. And it was a really interesting and heartwarming place to be.
I mean, I think we really genuinely kind of fell in love with the spirit of the Hong Kong people.
Yeah, it was that's why I was very sad when after the 89 days that it lasted.
79?
79 or 89. The bulldozers came through and demolished everything.
Mm-hmm. But there was a spirit of, wanting to protect the students, first of all, that I think was very, because we talked to a lot of people who were like, I'm really, the Hong Kong students, they're our future. We're here to protect the students. That was very reminiscent of Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
Actually, because the students started protesting and then people started coming out to support the students, right?
Right.
And then also people, the first video we made, right, of the dangerous weapons of the Hong Kong protesters, which was essentially about people building chairs and benches so the students could do their homework. You might be protesting against an authoritarian regime, but you got to get your math done,
I believe it's called maths in Hong Kong.
Probably.
They're wrong about that, though. But anyway, go on.
I mean, anyway.
I've totally derailed you.
Yes, because now I'm thinking about the trash cans that say "come" on them.
Yes, that was a weird thing.
Yeah. Hong Kong has a lot of cum dumpsters.
Oh, no.
Are we allowed to say that? It's technically true.
They have a lot of trash cans that say things like trash cum recycling, like CUM, because it's an old, it's an English term that nobody uses anymore to say and or with.
Yeah,
so,
it does not mean come like come here.
No, yes,
right.
It doesn't
or
mean
any
that.
other meaning, yeah.
So anyway, I was talking about the beautiful spirit of the Hong Kong people. But in a way this makes sense because the other thing I was going to talk about is their sense of humor.
Yeah.
Remember going to the Mongkok protest site and they had stolen the police barriers essentially and lashed them together to protect the site. And then they had put a bunch of photos of Xi Jinping holding an umbrella.
Oh, yeah.
Illustrations, like cartoon versions of Xi Jinping holding a yellow umbrella.
Yeah, I remember taking a photo standing next to like one of the big Xi Jinping cutouts.
Yeah, they
with like
had,
Xi Jinping holding an umbrella.
Right. So they had taken a photo of Xi Jinping holding an umbrella, which had made a big splash at the time because he was holding his own umbrella and not having some lackey hold his umbrella for him. And they
Man of the people.
Yeah, and they'd basically, photoshopped the umbrella yellow, and then that was all over the place. But one of the protesters explained to us that, the police can't really tear down the barricades that have Xi Jinping holding an umbrella.
Because then they'd have to tear down images of Xi Jinping.
Yeah, so it was just an example of just the type of sense of humor and, the Lenin walls that had all those Post-it notes of people having messages of support and all this different art up that was very... wasn't there some from that anime Death Note or something where somebody...
I vaguely remember something having to do with Death Note.
It was like they had Communist Party official names
in the book.
In the book.
Death Note was a anime about simply a book, a Death Note that if you wrote somebody's name in it, they would die.
Sounds really cheerful.
It was not a cheerful show.
But,
very good though.
But just lots of like pop cultural references and just funny. I don't know if people remember the Mr. and Miss little characters because I think that was mostly a British thing, but they were very popular in Hong Kong. So they had like Little Mr. Protester or Little Miss, like as the protesters.
Yeah. And I remember that's where we first met Zhou Fengsuo, Tiananmen Square massacre survivor.
Yes, and he talked a lot about how it reminded him of Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
And now Zhou Fengsuo has blocked from ever going back to Hong Kong.
As are we.
Well, we haven't been officially blocked. Joe tried to get in and they refused him at the border.
Which is fortunate for him in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tried to go in 2019
Oh, okay. That would have
when
been okay.
we were there.
So this
'Cause
was
I remember,
before the national security
this was
law.
This was right in that first few weeks after the 1 million person protest had happened, and we had traveled to Hong Kong immediately.
This is in
2019.
2019.
In 2019, and then Joe had tried to go to Hong Kong, and then they blocked him.
Yeah.
Because I remember texting with him essentially, and it was the middle of night in Hong Kong. And
Right.
he was like, "I wish I could be there now." You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I love Hong Kong. It was an amazing city. Sadly, I think I do have to say it was an amazing city as it's being
changed a lot. I mean,
choked to death.
On our locals community page, I've been posting some photos of our trip to Hong Kong, and I had this moment where I was like, I probably should not post this photo of our 2014 fan meetup.
Yeah.
In case it somehow gets like the people in that photo in trouble in the future somehow, you know?
Mm-hmm. When we were there in 2016, we had a fan meetup where we did this mannequin challenge, which was a thing going around this time. And it was like this whole Matrix thing. It was really cool, but we took it down because we were concerned about the safety of everyone in that video.
Yeah, that was actually an amazing job by Alan. That
you cannot see anymore.
Hopefully some of you saw it before we had to take it down.
Yeah. Maybe someday we'll be able to put it back up.
That's the goal.
That's when
someday
we know
there's a bright future ahead.
As soon as Sam leaps back into time
and occupies the body of Carrie Lam.
Hong Kong should be free.
Well, I mean,
what are you saying, Miss Lam?
Or occupy the body of Xi Jinping, and then Xi Jinping can just take an early retirement to the countryside and eat some honey.
That wouldn't help. That's
not going to help anything, though. Like, if Xi Jinping leaves, they're just going to replace him.
What if Xi Jinping declared that Hong Kong should stay politically independent?
I think he would be purged from the party.
Yeah, he would definitely be Zhao Ziyang.
The best thing would be if Sam leapt back into time into Karl Marx's body and just didn't say anything. And then so many things would be solved.
Well, I don't know, because somebody else could have come up with.
That's right. He was like those ideas were already around. He was commissioned to write the Communist Manifesto.
Manifesto?
Yes.
One of the interesting things of having...
That's the real Death Note.
We had Josh Phillip on our podcast a few times to talk about the history of communism, and what was so interesting about that is how it goes back like the 17th century and like all of these like different sort of communist movements and these sort of proto-communist ideas behind the French Revolution and like...
Well, even Rousseau, the philosopher, was these ideas, essentially.
Yeah. So anyway, Mao could have picked them up from anywhere. So it's not enough to just go back in time and occupy Karl Marx. You have to occupy everybody.
It is not enough to be not communist. One must be anti-communist.
I feel like we're getting into something here which I don't really want to get into. But I would say that there is an increasing awareness now of the danger that the Chinese Communist Party faces, in part due to their vast overstepping in Hong Kong. And if there's anything good that's come out of the horrible way they've treated Hong Kong, it's that there is a lot more recognition of the problem of the Chinese Communist Party. And while venture capitalists and, investment firms like BlackRock are not willing to do the right thing, a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world do want to do the right thing. And they don't want to buy made in China. And they don't want to put their money with companies that are doing this sort of thing. I think that is that gives me a lot of hope.
Well, the whole reason that China is pushing the invade Taiwan thing now is because previously they were pushing, one country, two systems, just like Hong Kong.
Right.
And they can't do that anymore.
Well, when we went for the Taiwan elections in 2020, early 2020,
Pre-pandemic.
Yes. I actually do remember being a little nervous, though, as we were in the Taiwan airport, the Taipei airport, because I was like, could be here already, you know.
I did not get that sense from you about it.
Well, I don't think I said anything, but I was thinking about it because, you know, Taiwan had such a bad experience with SARS.
And there I was in the airport just taking all these big, deep breaths.
I was like licking all the mascots and everything. It was a really bad idea.
Licking all the poles in the airport.
And you didn't say a thing, Shelley.
So my point was that we talked to a lot of people who were saying, that the Hong Kong situation really influenced their vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before pre-Tsai Ing-wen, when Ma Ying-jeou was and the KMT were in charge in the mid-2000s.
The previous president of Taiwan.
And it really seemed like they signed these trade agreements, right? It really seemed, although people in Taiwan did not like that, and that led to the Sunflower Revolution and a bunch of things. But it seemed like they were going to go along the path of, we'll just do business first and open up that, and then slowly we will become absorbed into mainland China. And then that is no longer the case.
Yeah, and then the U.S. or no other countries in the world ever would have been involved or talking about we have to defend Taiwan.
Because if they don't want to.
So, as you were saying, man, if anything, the problem is clear.
Yeah.
Hopefully. I mean, I think the Hong Kong people knew in some ways that what they were doing essentially was sacrificing themselves. Some of the protesters we talked to were like, we know we're going to go down, but we want to do as much as we can to take the CCP down with us. And if that doesn't work, we want the world to understand. And
just to touch on this briefly, I think an example of this being the case is, let's take a look at the NBA. The whole Daryl Morey controversy when he tweeted in support for the Hong Kong protests. And then that caused a whole craven, kowtowing by the NBA. And now you have Enes Kanter of the Boston Celtics doing this whole thing about talking about, this week he talked about organ harvesting in China. It has become public in a way that the Chinese Communist Party desperately was trying to prevent from happening.
And the CCP really made a mistake. They kind of shot their shot already with the Daryl Morey thing. You know what I mean? They already tried to pressure the NBA as much as they could. The NBA kind of came out of it being like, well, we're not going. There was, a shakeup. Daryl Morey resigned. But in the end, the NBA didn't end up completely buckling to the Chinese Communist Party. And now Enes Kanter is saying all this stuff, and he's not breaking any NBA rules. He's just wearing lots of colorful sneakers and, tweeting, right? So what can they do to him?
And protesters are coming to his games, and so they're getting on camera, holding signs and stuff.
Yeah, and so, he said he's met with Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, and they've said that they're going to let him do it. But he said, I wish they would support me. I wish that they would say something about China, but they're not gonna.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, good on him. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great to see people like Enes Kanter taking a stand, knowing that he may have to do it completely alone, and that is real courage, knowing that he might just have to do this whole thing alone and be shunned by so many people in the NBA.
Or, brand partners, sponsors,
Yeah, he's putting millions of dollars on the line.
Yeah.
He said in the CNN interview with Christiane Amanpour, he was like, I don't want your endorsements. I don't want your money. And, talked about how China silences people with money, essentially.
Yeah.
And then we have the venture capital firms.
We have the venture capital. I like the arc of this podcast. It was very much like an episode of Quantum Leap. It started off with a problem. And then, we found hope. Things.
Are we trying to
putting right what once went wrong?
Well, we're still in the middle of trying to do that, I feel like.
So it'll be one of the 2-part episodes that I liked so much.
Okay, well, I wasn't expecting that, but I think that's a nice note to end on.
I think so. I think I know the best note to end on. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Thanks for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Jung.
And I'm Matt Canesta.
We'll talk to you next time.